Hello everyone, Mary Bond here, Group Director and Publisher of Seatrade Cruise, welcoming you to our first Seatrade Cruise Talks curated conversation piece. Today we're focusing on the return of cruise operations in Europe. I caught up with Claus Bødker, Director of Cruise Baltic, Captain Michael McCarthy, Chairman for Cruise Europe, Ukko Metsola, Vice President, Government Relations, Europe and Asia Pacific for Royal Caribbean Cruises, and Carmen Morosan, Global Shore Excursions Manager at Intercruises, to discuss what it will take to bring cruising in European waters back safely and swiftly. Okay, Michael, so what do you think it will take to bring cruising back safely and quickly from the European port perspective?
I think the question first, Mary, safely, obviously I agree with, quickly is a question that I like to debate with you. Look, we know that the business came to a complete standstill. It's unprecedented. We've heard all of that. Two very important steps are going to have to be put in place before there is a resumption in the cruise industry. And I would break it down into two protocols, Mary. The first protocol would be the negative publicity that was generated by the ports denying ships entry in the United States, and the problem in Japan will live long in the minds of a lot of people. And the idea of people being cocooned at sea on a ship, and if you're like trapped on that ship. So I would say that was handled very badly, not by the cruise lines, but I think by the ports, national authorities, etc. So there's going to have to be a protocol put in place that can never happen again. That a ship will be granted access to a port. It may be under conditions, it may be under health issues, it may be under whatever, but you've got to get the ship into port and deal with the situation. So that's the first protocol that has to be set in place. And I do blame the ports, even though I'm a chair of a ports organisation. Would it have been handled differently in Europe? It was handled differently in Europe. It was much more underscore. Southampton was accepting ships back, Tilbury, all of the ports, Berg, etc. And there was a big offer to actually accept the ships in as standby and layby. So, but a protocol has to be put in place that the cruise lines and the passengers know that at least the ship will be allowed dock and get off. The second protocol has to be on the health procedures in relation to what is required from ports and what is required from a national and a government policy, because currently the EU government and tourism ministers, they cannot agree a joint exit strategy. So we have some countries lifting lockdown, we have others stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have different situations throughout Europe. So none of us know at this stage. I could not tell you when a cruise ship would be allowed dock in Ireland.
I am very happy to see that the borders are slowly opening, which is very encouraging for us. And I believe this is an amazing time for the industry to actually start looking at the recovery, immediate recovery, because as we said, this is evolving so fast. And I believe the one key thing is the industry collaboration, this open dialogue we've been keeping between us and all the stakeholders in the industry to enable to return to operation as soon as possible. Then from the government and the tourism boards, I believe we need to see these clear destination guidelines, but also timelines when the industry can make preparation for the ships to return to the ports. And those clearly define health and safety measures that ideally will be consistent across the destination, but consistent at the level of the region, and why not globally. And from the cruise lines, we've seen a lot of communication from their parts from the beginning, setting the expectation from where they think they can resume service. And we hope that they continue to communicate. And so all of us, the suppliers, the port agencies, the port authorities, we can all prepare for their return.
I have 6 points that I would like to mention before cruising is back safely and quickly. First of all, confidence in that the safety on board and at the destinations are not compromised. You have to be absolutely sure that you are safe and you're not getting infected, both at the destinations and on board the cruise ship. Another thing is that we have heard a lot of stories about cruise guests that were caught between ports, and of course, I assume that will no longer be the case. Then we also need a customer need for cruising. I've heard that from the US cruise lines that the reservations for 2021 are looking quite okay, but it will be very necessary to have a European that also would like to go cruising. Then a special thing that COVID-19 is more a big city thing due to the lack of space in the bigger cities. And I'm currently thinking about whether that will have an impact on the cruise preferences in the future. Will we see that the cruises are going to more smaller destinations compared to the bigger cities? Let's see. The fourth point is that cruise guest behavior may have changed. We don't know how, and it remains to be seen. Some may be influenced by, at least here in Denmark, we have had a lot of negative media coverage about the COVID-19 and cruises. I'm not sure how the situation is in the other countries, but at least the behavior will change for the cruise guests and the cruise lines. The fifth point is marketing. Once the world opens up again, I'm sure that the marketing will be very fierce because there's a lot of competition to get to receive a cruise call. Then the sixth point is that a lot of people are underestimating the locals in this due to the negative media coverage. I could be a bit afraid that some of the locals would not welcome the cruise guests as warmly as before the COVID-19, because they have heard all these stories about COVID-19 on board cruise ships. In fact, 50% of all COVID-19 infected persons on board cruise ships, they come from 2 cruise ships, but the public, they don't know that, and we should inform them about that as good as possible in order for them to be welcomed in the same friendly way as they did before the COVID-19.
You're obviously been in contact with your members during this lockdown period. What areas are your ports and destinations focusing on in order to create a controlled and safe environment for cruise passengers?
Our ports every port is looking at what they need to put in place. But the first thing that the ports will have to do is, and I got an article this morning from one of the unions in a port, in a major port in Europe, and it sets out quite clearly that the restrictions will have to apply first and foremost for the health and safety of the port and the port staff. And that includes when a pilot steps on board the ship, to berthing the ship, to putting the interaction between the shoreside labour and putting gangways on board. And that's a close interaction once that ship is tied up. So this goes back to the health protocol, Mary. We have nothing yet. We have government restrictions laying out the steps. We have ports looking at their own employees, and they've set out their criteria for what they need in place. And it's the basic stuff from hand washing, sanitizing, wearing face masks, etc. So everybody's implementing their own national guidelines. There shouldn't be a big lobbying exercise needed, Mary, because the cruise industry is absolutely fundamental to tourism. It's the highest growth area of tourism in Europe, in the world. So if national governments cannot see the value from the economic value, the work, number of people employed in it, it is an absolute fundamental industry to get it going and get it going in a proper way. I have a 9-page return to work safety protocol here from a union in Ireland. Now, it's not impossible for any of us, and I mean, I could do it. Any of us could do it. I could take that protocol and I could adapt it. We're not looking at reinventing the wheel here. We're talking about a fundamental health issue for the safety of the passengers, for the safety of the crew. So it's not, all the lobbying can go on unless the national governments come together and lift the restrictions together. Then the cruise ships have no certainty in how they're going to cruise, where they're going to cruise. But look, health and safety, each national government has published documents. Somebody could sit down and look at them, put them together, and come up with 30 or 40 bullet steps that need to be taken. And at least it's a fundamental startup, and that can be added to. That, we're behind the curve on that, and we've lost, I think, 2 months putting a document like this together.
Sometimes I'm very envious on my colleague in Cruise Norway, because it's only one country. Here around the Baltic Sea, you have 10 different countries with 10 different regulations and restrictions and laws regarding covering the COVID-19. So, however much I would like to inform you about how we do it in practice, it's practically impossible at the moment because we are so many different countries. But I'm sure that the cruise lines, or maybe Clear, will be having some restrictions on the cruise guests before they embark the cruise vessel. And then you have the national laws locally. For instance, our neighbors here in Sweden, they have a totally different approach to COVID-19 as we have here in Denmark. So it's rather complex situation right now at the moment. But I'm sure that there will be many changes, both in the destinations and in on the cruise ships. On the cruise ships, I have no influence on what we see there, but I'm sure we'll see a lot of changes on land. It could be distribution of hand sanitizers to all cruise guests, so they have it ready at hand. It will also be that Shorex buses, they only take 50% capacity, in order to secure social distancing. Will the price for the shoreks increase because there are fewer to pay, or will the cruise lines lower the price for shoreks? If they keep the relatively high level of pricing on the shoreks, will that mean then that some people will walk into the city center instead? So there's a lot of things that we need to have in control. One thing is certain, however, and that is that we'll see a lot of new product and a lot of new business models following the COVID-19. For instance, will it be possible for the cruise line or the shoreks provider to guarantee entrance for the cruise guests to a certain attractions? It's very important that the cruise guests come in small groups. It will probably be the same also in 2021, that the groups are smaller. Lines are not very good. Lines of people are not very good. So the cruise guests should be able to enter the attractions as quickly and as swiftly as possible. So I'm just thinking about how can shoreks suppliers use this opportunity to provide extra value to the cruise lines and to the cruise guests by offering new products. I'm sure that we'll see a lot of new, interesting and attractive new products coming out of the COVID-19, also within the cruise industry.
Okay, Carmen. So what areas are you focusing on in order to create a controlled and safe environment for cruise guests on shoreks? And what do you think that will look like?
Well, obviously, this is, again, very much evolving, dependent on how the industry decides to move ahead and also on very much on each destination requirements. But there are 4 key areas on which we've been focusing. And those are the health and safety, the capacity, the technology implementation, and sustainability. And if I may break them down a little bit, on the health and safety part, this has always been a priority in this industry and for Intercruises as well. And we've been fortunate to be part of the TUI group, so meaning that we had access to these teams of experts to guide us to a very good process. And they were there involved with us in the initial response to the pandemic outbreak. And they are now involved again to help us support the cruise industry as it restarts again. On the capacity side, we obviously expect there will be smaller group sizes due to social distancing requirements. And this, of course, will impact in the number and the type of vehicles we use, the venue entrance availability, those allotments, and the number of the guides we have available. Then for technology, we are intensifying our efforts to incorporate technology that will aid with the social distancing. And I'm referring here to those audio guiding devices, or even better, the audio guiding apps, because the apps sitting on the guests' devices will not need to pass through these rigorous sanitation procedures. But I believe one silver lining of the lockdown is that the world population has gone through this tremendous crash course in technology on the last 2.5 months. And therefore, the adoption of this new technology might be easily embraced now than pre-COVID era. And last but not least, on sustainability, we already implemented sustainable principle in our operations, and we have been using this downtime to further enhance how we operate, so we can return the operations even more sustainable manner. And to be more concrete in here, we know this health and safety equipment that we will be required to use now, and we wanted to make sure that it's correctly managed, that it's locally sourced, that it's properly disposed, and those cleaning material that we're going to use they are as environmentally friendly as they can be. On the shortest aspect of sustainability, we know that transportation is going to be a key challenge, as the social distances means that we will need to use more vehicles operating sometimes half empty in capacity. So we're looking at different potential solutions at there.
It's a weird scenario, isn't it? That we always say we needed time to plan for the future, and now we've been forcibly given the time, I guess, in a way. So it's interesting how the product development will and is accelerating, and that we will see it, the fruits of your labours in these past couple of months when we have been in lockdown, quite quickly when cruising resumes. So,
absolutely, and I think this challenge has been also an opportunity, in to do this process, which, as you said, we have never had the opportunity to do it before, and now suddenly we had the opportunity to kind of take a very, very good look at the product we're offering and see what we're missing, what else can we do. So yeah, I think it's been a good, productive 2 months for the product development.
So, Ukko, if you may permit me, I'd like to ask you, what is your take on the recently published European Commission roadmap to kickstart tourism this summer?
Well, I look at them primarily as the first positive political signal from the European Union. They want to rescue the travel and tourism sector. It plays a fundamentally important role in the European economy. European Union member states have been sending very similar signals, and there is a lot of promising content in that. They are clearly calling for EU member states to progressively restore transport services and connectivity. They make specific references also to cruising, of course, with required protocols and new processes in place to mitigate any health risks. But generally, it's very welcome piece of paper. It is not a legislative proposal. It is just Commission's guidelines, but it's a good positive political signal. That's how I would look at it in a sort of high level.
Do you think we will see a Schengen-wide corridor of travel, or do you think we'll see countries, as we have, I think, already in this last week, go it alone or between each other with agreements?
That's a very good question, and it's an interesting one, because we are, of course, dealing here with the blurred lines between the competence of the European Union and the competence of the European Union member states. So when it comes to the fundamental freedoms within EU, free movement of people, capital, goods and services, it is very much the EU who is in charge, and they are the guardian of the treaties, and free movement is a fundamental cornerstone of EU, and they clearly want to have a coordinated approach. But then at the same time, EU has very little competence on health policy. And this is where the dilemma lies, because, of course, member states have the right under extraordinary circumstances like the ones we have been witnessing to take unilateral actions. And especially when the travel restrictions were put in place, it was, of course, far from coordinated. So member states just started closing their borders, and European Commission and EU in Brussels was just looking from a side. I think that there is a general political will across the EU to lift the sanctions in a more coordinated manner. And I think many member states have also spoken to that effect. But it doesn't mean that everything will happen on the exactly same date or in the same way. So Italy will open on the 3rd of June, Germany and many others on the 15th June. Spain has said that they will be open for travelers from 1st July. And I do believe that initially we are looking into traveling and tourism within the EU or European context. So this is going to be very much free movement within the Schengen area. What the Commission has been very clear about is that it cannot be that there is some bilateral deal, let's say, between Croatia and Germany that would allow Germans to go to Croatia, but not the Dutch people. That would, again, undermine a very fundamental principle of the European Union, as long as those countries have a relatively comparable health status. of course, if there are countries that are in a different place from the COVID-19 perspective, certain exemptions are possible. And I believe, for example, Greece has announced the date when they will open to the traveling from the other EU countries, but not UK. And I'm pretty sure that is more a reflection of the Greek government's understanding or perceived higher level of risk at this point in time, when UK is perhaps behind the curve compared to other large member states such as Italy and Spain. So we all want to see how the UK quarantine policy that was just announced will manage the situation. And I'm pretty sure that when the curve and the health situation in the UK improves, Greece will also review its policy. I don't think it has anything to do with Brexit or anything of that nature. So I think that we will see a sort of a Schengen bubble or European-wide travel bubble where the governments and everybody has a joint interest in rescuing and saving whatever can be saved for the travel and tourism summer peak season, given that it's so fundamentally economically important for many Mediterranean countries and others.
You mentioned earlier on that you had seen some references to cruise in the European Commission roadmap document, but when we hear, for example, as you just cited, Greece one day, Spain have issued a different date, Italy a different date. They say visitors from outside will be able to travel to the country, but is that by air and land, or does that also include by ship and therefore cruise ship?
Well, I would imagine that at first instance, we are probably more likely to look into European passengers sailing on European itineraries. So my guess is that we will see resuming service of brands that can source typically their own nationals within the European market. It would sort of make sense. I don't think that anyone is looking into fly cruise from other continents as the immediate first step. It will hopefully follow. I think it's a very important point in the Commission's guidelines that they actually talk about restoration of cruise services at EU and international level. So it is not like they are saying that we just want to make sure that there's some cruising in Europe, but they're probably sequencing it so that it's more likely to start within the Schengen traveling, knowing that the situation in the United States, again, from the medical perspective, is very difficult. I think it's just common sense and realistic to assume that it's not like we will have tens of thousands of Americans flying in the near future, joining cruise ships in Europe. But I think within Europe, we should get some positive signals, hopefully, later on this season. But there is a lot of uncertainty. Nobody knows exactly when and how the resumption will actually happen. A big question is, of course, the consumer reaction. I think we are very, very committed into making sure that we are not seen only as returning to service. We want to be absolutely sure that we are seen as a trustworthy industry who does everything it can in its power to ensure a healthy return to service. And that it will inevitably take some time. I mean, I've been personally dealing quite a lot with our repatriation efforts, basically getting our valued employees, the crew members, back to their home countries. And that has taken quite a lot of time with the current travel restrictions around the world. And we are a very complicated and complex industry. So just thinking about going back to service and also thinking about getting crew back to our ships, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, which sort of indicate that this is unlikely to happen overnight.
Okay,
But clearly Commission is, the underlying political signal is positive, that they want this to happen, and then when it can happen depends a lot on our internal work, which is very heavy and ongoing, and then of course active dialogue with governments and regulators as it relates to the new protocols. It will not be return to business as usual. It will be something rather different. We are all working hard on these new protocols. We have hired a lot of outside expertise. We are really looking at this scientifically to come up with best possible protocols and procedures that will ensure the safety of our passengers. Then I think that rather than starting to communicate something in a sort of piecemeal kind of way, I think that we just need to take our time, and it will be up to others above me in the company to decide when we are really ready to come out with a sort of comprehensive plan. But I can see that a lot of work is being done right now, and we are actively involved with a lot of people also from academia to really make sure that what we are doing is actually very sound and the best possible way forward in view of the scientific understanding, where of course in relation to this virus there are also many question marks still. Then the next step will be for us to discuss with the ports, with the tour operators, what do these protocols mean to their operations. I think that it's sort of common sense that we are probably talking about social distancing, for example, perhaps avoiding situations where multiple cruise ships come alongside at the same time and go through terminals in large numbers, mixing people from different backgrounds and from different ships. So there will probably be these kinds of elements which are fairly common sense that will play a role. And then, of course, also, you know, if we think about the land tours, it is a sort of same thing. I think there will be a different type of product offering where we need to assess very carefully to what degree we and our service providers and business partners can provide very healthy and secure, contained and controlled environment for our passengers, so that we reduce the risk of anybody getting infected during their shore excursion. And they are not easy questions, but I'm sure that some very, very good and solid answers will be found. And we have other colleagues who are looking into those details as we speak. But I don't think that I'm able today to articulate that, well, we want ports and tour operators to do A, B, and C. I think the first point needs to be that we find out how cruise ships will be operated in a safe and a healthy manner, which will gain acceptance from the governments, regulators, and importantly from the consumers. And then we will start testing and resuming into service bit by bit. I don't think it's going to be a big bang when suddenly all the cruise ships are back in business. It's more likely to be a gradual approach where we test and train and rehearse these new protocols so that all employees and everybody else will get used to them, including our business partners. And then gradually we will start returning towards normality. And then, of course, there are a lot of unknowns. We don't know exactly when we will have a vaccine that will work. We don't know whether there will be a second wave or how long this virus will be with us. So there are still many things that can change the game plan. But we are certainly looking into, first of all, not doing anything in a rushed manner, but rather making sure that when we do return to service, we can do so with confidence, because it is fundamentally important that the consumers understand that we are doing everything we can. There's a difference between trust and trustworthiness. And I think it's very difficult in this day and age with the COVID-19 on this planet to say with 100% confidence level that there just can't be a case. But it's much more important to be able to communicate that we have done everything in our power to mitigate the risk of that happening, so that we are seen as a very reliable and trustworthy travel company and an industry. And then, of course, there's the question of, should there be the case, how is that then handled? And that's one of these questions that we need to discuss with the ports and other regulators, so that we don't face these situations as we did early on during this crisis, when everybody kind of panicked and suddenly our ships couldn't call anywhere, and we just always couldn't do the right thing from the medical perspective. So I think that these are the sort of issues that we need to work through and discuss with governments, that if they're against all of the precautions and all the new medical procedures, one day is a case, how we first isolate such a situation on board, and how do we disembark such a passenger into a treatment on a shoreside facilities if necessary, but in any case make sure that we don't have another spreading of the virus on board a ship. And here I think this is very intellectually stimulating and interesting discussion, which I feel is going into the very right direction, because when I look at any academic papers such as the European Healthy Gateways draft document that will also address these issues, any documents from the Commission or the Member States. I think we all want the same thing, and that is the good news. We want to make sure that we have a common understanding of what healthy return to service means, and we will absolutely get there. It is just a question of when, and that date is still not entirely clear.
Okay, Ukko, well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I guess the overriding summary for me for what you said is we all have to work hard together, but be patient.
Yeah, and we will get there.
Well,
I'm increasingly optimistic.
Thank you all for joining me today, and thanks to all our speakers. Don't forget to follow us at seatrade-cruise.com and on social media for latest insights and details on our next Sea Trade Cruise talks.